Picture this, you look out your window and a tow truck is hooking up your car. Standing next to it, the neighborhood HOA bullies smiling. They thought they finally trapped me. They thought I was going to pay a $400 fine, but what these entitled board members didn't realize is that I didn't just break their rules, I changed them. We forced a secret election, voted their toxic team out, and rewrote the entire legal system of this neighborhood. And the look on their faces when I walked outside with the new bylaws? Absolute gold. Here is how we beat the HOA bullies at their own game. I dropped the groceries right there on the pavement. Milk carton split open, eggs rolling into the grass. What the hell are you doing? That's my car. He glanced up, annoyed at the interruption. It's a HOA violation, sir. Unauthorized vehicle parked in violation of community standards. Your Toyota Camry, 6 years old, freshly washed that morning, apparently qualified as unauthorized. I showed him my registration, my insurance, the HOA parking permit stuck to my windshield. He shrugged like none of it mattered. Orders came from the board. You want to dispute it, call them. Then he handed me a card with a phone number and went back to his chains. 20 minutes later, my car was gone and I was standing in an empty driveway holding a business card and a grocery bag full of broken eggs. Welcome to Meadowbrook Estates, where the Homeowners Association doesn't just have rules, they have a whole personality disorder. Let me back up 6 months. My wife got transferred for work and we needed a place fast. Meadowbrook looked perfect online. Neat houses, good schools nearby, a community pool, reasonable HOA fees. What the listing didn't mention was that the HOA board was run by 3 people who treated property management like a competitive sport. At the top, Richard Langford, a retired insurance adjuster who turned rule enforcement into his post-retirement hobby. Then there was Patricia Nguyen, who'd lived in the neighborhood for 30 years and believed her seniority gave her veto power over everyone else's lives. And finally, Tom Breckman, a guy who owned a towing company and shockingly was the sole approved vendor for all vehicle removals in the community. You see where this is going. The first week we moved in, everything was fine. Neighbors waved. Kids played basketball in driveways. It felt normal. Then the letters started. Our mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Our front door wreath extended 4 inches beyond the approved decorative threshold. My wife's work truck parked in our own driveway overnight violated the commercial vehicle restriction even though it was just a pickup with a company logo. Each letter came with a fine, $50 here, $75 there. And every letter was signed by Richard Langford in a font so formal it looked like a court summons. I figured it was a phase, new residents getting the inspection treatment, pay the fines, adjust the wreath, move on, but it didn't stop. Our trash cans, stored behind a privacy fence in our backyard, were apparently visible from a second-story window 3 houses down. Violation. The solar lights along our walkway were half an inch taller than the community standard. Violation. My daughter's bicycle, left on the front lawn for 20 minutes while she ran inside for water, counted as lawn storage. Violation. I started going to HOA meetings, held the first Tuesday of every month in the community center. Richard ran them like a corporate board meeting, Robert's Rules of Order enforced to the letter. Patricia sat beside him with a binder thick as a phone book, cross-referencing every comment against precedent. Tom barely said anything, just nodded along and collected his checks. Other neighbors showed up occasionally, but most had learned to stay quiet. Asking questions got you labeled as difficult. Pushing back meant your property got extra scrutiny. One guy questioned a special assessment for landscaping and suddenly his house was cited for peeling paint that had been there for years. The message was clear. Pay, comply, shut up. But here's the thing about people like Richard. They assume everyone else is too tired or too scared to actually read the rules they're enforcing. They rely on intimidation and paperwork to keep people in line. What they don't expect is someone who's willing to do the homework. After my car got towed, I was done. I paid the $400 retrieval fee, which included a mysterious administrative charge that went straight to the HOA, and I started reading. The governing documents, all 90 pages, the county regulations. The state HOA laws that nobody ever mentioned at meetings. Turns out there were rules about the rules. For example, any change to community regulations required a vote of the full membership, not just board approval. Richard had been updating restrictions on his own for years, adding clauses and requirements without ever bringing them to a vote. The towing policy, never approved by residents. The approved vendor list that funneled all business to Tom's company, never voted on. The fines for minor violations that had tripled over the past 3 years, unilateral decision. I pulled 5 years of meeting minutes. Most were barely a page-long vague summaries that mentioned votes without specifying who voted or what the actual count was. When I cross-referenced them with the county records, half the so-called approved measures had no documentation at all. I started talking to neighbors, quietly at first, coffee on someone's porch, a conversation at the mailbox. What I found was a community that had been nickel-and-dimed into exhausted compliance. Janet, 2 houses down, had paid over $2,000 in fines over 3 years for things like holiday decorations left up too long and a fence stain that was allegedly the wrong shade of cedar. Paul across the street had been threatened with a lien on his house because he refused to pay for a special assessment to repair a community sign that didn't need repairing. The Hendersons were selling their house just to escape the constant harassment. Everyone had a story. Nobody thought anything could change. But here's what Richard and his board didn't know. Under state law, any homeowner could petition for a special election if they gathered signatures from 20% of the community. Meadowbrook had 48 homes. I needed 10 signatures. I had 22 by the end of the week. The petition called for a vote to recall the current board and elect new members under revised election procedures. I filed it with the county and sent copies to every homeowner via certified mail. Richard called me 2 days later. His voice was tight, controlled. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Thomas. The board operates under established protocols." I told him the protocols were being challenged and the election was happening whether he liked it or not. He tried the usual intimidation. Threatened to fine me for misuse of community resources, said my petition was invalid on procedural grounds, claimed I was causing unnecessary disruption. I let him finish. Then I told him I'd already spoken to an attorney who specialized in HOA law, and every single one of his threats was legally meaningless. The silence on the other end of the line was worth every dollar I'd spent on legal advice. The special election was set for 6 weeks out. Richard and his board went into overdrive. They sent out a letter to every homeowner warning about the dangers of inexperienced leadership. Patricia started a phone campaign calling neighbors to remind them how much work the board did to keep property values high. Tom's towing truck started making extra passes through the neighborhood, a not-so-subtle reminder of who held enforcement power. But something had shifted. People were talking. At the grocery store, at school pickup, in group chats that had been quiet for years. The Hendersons decided not to sell. Paul started documenting every interaction with the board. Janet printed out copies of all her fines and started asking which specific rule she'd violated each time. I spent those 6 weeks preparing. I read every relevant statute. I documented every procedural failure. I built a presentation showing exactly how much money the community had paid in fines over 5 years, where that money went, and how much of it ended up benefiting Tom's towing company. The numbers were ugly. Over $60,000 in fines collected. Less than $10,000 spent on actual community improvements. The rest had gone to administrative fees, legal costs for enforcing violations, and payments to Tom's company for towing and vehicle storage. I also did something Richard never expected. I ran for the board myself, along with Janet and Paul, 3 candidates who'd been on the receiving end of the current board's enforcement obsession. 3 people who had no interest in power for its own sake, just in making the community livable again. The night of the election, the community center was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the back. Richard opened the meeting with his usual formality, but you could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew this wasn't routine. The vote was by secret ballot. County supervisor present to ensure everything was legitimate. It took 40 minutes to count. Richard, Patricia, and Tom were removed by a vote of 38 to 10. Janet, Paul, and I were elected to replace them. The room didn't erupt in applause or anything dramatic. It was quieter than that. Relief, mostly. The kind of exhale people make when something that's been pressing down on them finally lifts. Richard stood up, face red, and walked out without a word. Patricia looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't figure out what. Tom just shrugged and followed them out. Our first act as the new board was to freeze all pending fines and schedule a comprehensive review of every rule in the governing documents. Our second was to terminate the exclusive vendor agreement with Tom's towing company and open up competitive bidding. Our third was to vote on refunding fines that had been assessed under rules that were never properly approved. That last one passed unanimously. Over the next 3 months, we went through the entire regulatory structure. We eliminated 40% of the rules outright, mostly the nitpicky nonsense that existed only to generate violations. We rewrote the enforcement process to require photographic evidence, written warnings, and a clear appeals process before any fine could be assessed. We established term limits for board members and mandatory financial audits every year. And we passed a new rule, the one I'm most proud of. Any proposed regulation had to be posted publicly for 30 days, discussed at a community meeting, and approved by a majority vote of homeowners before it took effect. No more unilateral decisions, no more rules by decree. The community actually had to agree. Richard tried to fight back. He filed complaints with the county claiming procedural violations. He sent threatening letters about legal action. He showed up at one meeting and tried to reclaim his seat, arguing the election had been invalid. The county supervisor, the same one who'd overseen the vote, told him to sit down or leave. He left. Tom's towing company lost the contract and suddenly stopped patrolling the neighborhood. Turns out when you're not getting paid to harass people, the motivation disappears. Patricia stayed in the community but stopped coming to meetings. I see her sometimes at the mailbox. She doesn't wave. 6 months after the election, Meadowbrook felt like a different place. Kids left bikes on lawns without parents panicking. People painted their front doors colors they actually liked. Someone put up a little free library without filing for approval and nobody cared. The community pool, which had been closed half the summer for mysterious maintenance issues, stayed open all season. We even had a neighborhood barbecue, the first one in years. Richard showed up, stood at the edge for a while, and then left without speaking to anyone. I almost felt bad for him, almost, but then I remembered my car getting towed. Janet's $2,000 in fines, the Hendersons almost losing their home to escape harassment, the exhaustion that had settled over the entire community like fog. Some people need rules to feel secure. Other people need rules to feel powerful. Richard was the second kind. And the thing about people like that is they don't stop until someone makes them stop. Here's what I learned. HOAs aren't inherently bad. They're just structures, and structures reflect the people running them. When those people care about the community, it works. When they care about control, it becomes a nightmare. But the power in an HOA doesn't actually belong to the board. It belongs to the homeowners. Most people just never realize it until things get bad enough to fight back. The rules that govern these communities are public record. The laws that regulate them are clear. The mechanisms to challenge abuse are built right into the system. You just have to be willing to use them. And yeah, it takes time. It takes effort. It takes reading 90 pages of governing documents and learning what words like quorum and fiduciary duty actually mean. It takes knocking on doors and convincing people that change is possible. It takes standing up in a room full of neighbors and saying the thing everyone's thinking but nobody wants to say out loud. But here's the truth. Bullies like Richard rely on silence. They count on exhaustion. They operate in the space where people are too busy or too tired to fight back. The moment someone refuses to be silent, the entire system starts to crack. My car got towed because Richard thought he could, because he'd done it before and nobody stopped him. Because his rules said he could, and that was enough. What he didn't count on was someone reading the actual rules, the real ones, the ones that said he couldn't. So if you're dealing with an HOA that's out of control, if you're getting fined for things that don't make sense, if you're watching your neighbors get harassed and thinking there's nothing you can do, I'm here to tell you that's not true. Read your governing documents. Know your state laws. Talk to your neighbors. And if the people in charge won't listen, replace them. It's your community, not theirs. They just forgot that for a while. Sometimes they need reminding. And if a tow truck shows up in your driveway, take pictures, read the fine print, and start asking questions. Because the moment you do, everything changes.